Welcome to Radicalize Me. George Carlin is widely considered to be one of the greatest comedians of all time, with him and Richard Pryor almost interchangeable as the best and second best, depending on which list you look at. On June 22nd, 2008, George Carlin died of a heart attack at age 71. I was 19 at the time and home from college on summer break. My friend texted me the news, and as soon as I saw it, my phone flew out of my hand across the room. Not out of anguish or something, but because it was just so shocking. You have to understand, Carlin was one of those celebrities who was just a fact of life, a constant in an entertainment industry where faces come and go, an absolute institution, like Robin Williams was for a lot of my generation, or what I assume Johnny Carson was like for people a little before my time. At least that's what it was like for me. I adored George Carlin. I do what I do because of him. I did stand-up comedy for a decade and a half because of him. My grandparents were fans of his, and my biggest cheerleaders in following his footsteps. I had every album, every special, every book, and I've seen just about every interview and TV appearance. So believe me when I say, George Carlin was not a conservative. He was not a right-winger. He would not have liked Donald Trump, and he would not have supported the anti-vax movement. We know this because in his lifetime, he stated quite plainly where he stood on all of this. He saw the modern Republican movement form under Nixon, Reagan, and the Bushes. He saw through the empty rhetoric of Democrats like Obama and Clinton.
I call him Clinton. Clinton, C-L-I-T-T-I-N apostrophe.
He actually claimed he didn't belong to any particular political affiliation. But none of this has stopped right-wing politicians, media figures, and voters from claiming Carlin as one of their own, usually due to memeified, out-of-context quotes. So let's take a look at some of these claims and debunk them using Carlin's own words, as well as those of his daughter, Kelly Carlin, a minor celebrity in her own right. Let's start with a recent tweet from the New York Post. Quote, Joe Rogan hints he will record podcast from Mar-a-Lago with Trump as walk-on guest after refusing to travel for Harris. So I see this tweet and my first thought is, who cares? He obviously likes Trump more, and it's his show and he's going to do it the way he wants to do it. For the record, I think it was a mistake for Harris not to go on JRE. It's the biggest podcast in the world, and whatever you think of it, politicians should not turn down an opportunity to talk to that large of an audience, especially when Democrats are so worried about their ability to speak to young men, of whom there are likely many in Rogan's audience. And the right thing to do is to do the show the way the show is done. Go to the studio. When Obama went on WTF with Mark Maron, Maron did the opposite of Rogan at first. Obama's people contacted him, said he wanted to do the show, and Maron asked if he should come to the White House. But they said, no, we'll come do it at your place in the garage like you normally do. So they put snipers on the roof and whatever else, and they did the show the way the show is done. And Maron is a Democrat. He was an Obama guy. So, let's be honest, Joe Rogan has fully bought into the Trump project. And again, whatever you think of Rogan and Trump, you have to know that Rogan is not exactly doing contentious journalism. He's not challenging whoever's in power. He's all in on one side now. And when you have the biggest podcast in the world, that matters. So then Kyle Kalinske quote tweets the Post and says, quote, Rogan is fake independent media, barely a comedian anymore, and he's morphed into state media for Trump. He's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. Now, Kyle is a left-leaning commentator. I think he's fine. His show, Secular Talk, is not my favorite, but now and then I see clips and I think he does a great job. And I have to agree with him here, at least because it's worth noting that Rogan's career has always been about tearing down idols, irreverence for the powerful, and questioning everything. This is why I was a Joe Rogan fan for many years. But in my opinion, you're just not doing that stuff anymore if you're all in for the Republicans or the Democrats, the two capitalist ruling class parties. And despite Trump's outsider branding, if you're in for Trump, you're in for the Republican Party. So I promise I'm not going to read out Twitter threads for the whole video. We're almost done. So then this huge JRE fan account quote tweets Kyle and says, quote, former podcast guest, wow face. Yes, Kyle used to be a somewhat frequent guest on JRE, one of a few left-leaning folks Rogan would have on regularly, including people like Abby Martin and Crystal Ball. I don't have much to say about this response. It shouldn't be that shocking to see someone call Rogan a right-wing lackey, given his trajectory over the past few years. He never had that many leftist guests, but although you could say his show just has the same problem as most of media in that he probably considers guests like Bill Maher and Barry Weiss to be leftists too. So let's leave that there. Then there's a response to the fan accounts tweet, which contains a meme-ified photo of Carlin with one of his famous quotes on it. Quote, "I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me." And the caption, "George Carlin was right on the globalists." One thing I'm sure of is George Carlin would never have talked about globalists. He was never into wacky Alex Jones conspiracy theory nonsense. Speaking of which, here's a nice Carlin quote for you from Bill Maher's old show, Politically Incorrect, in 2001.
There is no national conspiracy to buy elections and control America.
You don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. These people went to the same universities and fraternities. They're on the same boards of directors. They're in the same country clubs. They have like interests. They don't need to call a meeting. They know what's good for them, and they're getting it. There used to be 7 oil companies. There are now 3. It will soon be 2. The things that matter in this country have been reduced in choice. There are 2 political parties. There are a handful of insurance companies. There are about 6 or 7 information things. But if you want a bagel, there are 23 flavors because you have the illusion. You have the illusion of choice.
The other interesting thing about that meme is it actually includes a citation. It's from the 1992 Carlin HBO special Jammin' in New York. Now again, while he always claimed to never be firmly on one side or the other, this special contains some of his most anti-right-wing material. But right-wingers, especially Trump supporters, seem to love this out-of-context quote about not trusting the government. So I said, he wouldn't have believed Trump either, and he wouldn't yap about globalists. He correctly identified the capitalist ruling class as the culprits. It's true, Carlin understood the class dynamics of capitalism and explained them well. He never openly embraced socialism or any other ideology, but later on, I will argue that his critique of capitalism was very solid and a strongly held belief of his. Another user chimed in on this thread saying, quote, "Trump is now the government, so we can't trust him either. You can't trust anyone that attaches themselves to the machine. He's not destroying the machine. He is now the machine itself that we seek to destroy. George Carlin is rolling in his grave right now, I'm sure of it." Then, the user who posted the meme said, "Imagine what he would tell us today. Shocked face." So I said, he'd say it's a big club and you ain't in it, but Trump is.
It's a big club and you ain't in it.
Now it's hard to even tell what the user who posted the meme meant here. They're engaging in some bot behavior and not directly answering people, so who even knows if this is a real person? But the conservative Carlin posting goes beyond random Twitter bots. A May 2022 article from The Independent called "He Was Making Fun of These Motherfuckers: Why George Carlin's Radical Underdog Comedy is Still So Relevant" features Kelly Carlin herself rebuking any claims the right has to her father's legacy. The author, Kevin E.G. Perry, mentions the quote about never believing the government, saying, quote, "This stance has led him to be venerated by right-wing sites like Breitbart and caused some on social media to claim that he may well have been on board with the anti-vax movement if he were alive today." Kelly takes it from here. "The reality is he's a man of science," she says of her father. "He had a major heart condition. He would have gotten a vaccine. He would have hated Trump. Lots of people go, oh, he would have loved him because he speaks out and he's politically incorrect. No, he's a white male businessman. Come on, people. Have you been watching him for 50 years? From day one, he was making fun of these motherfuckers. And that's the thing. You don't have to be smart to enjoy Carlin's humor. But if you don't pay attention to the context and the content, you can come to these incorrect conclusions about why he spoke the way he did. Was he a guy who liked dirty humor? Of course. But he also had a lot of important shit to say. Even if you put aside the politics, he loved writing and self-expression. That's why he had this free speech warrior persona. He wasn't just mad that he wasn't allowed to say the 7 dirty words on the radio.
Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits.
He was concerned about what else would be banned once we started down that road. Just like the great Lenny Bruce before him, when George Carlin talked about blowjobs and assholes, He was doing it to fight for your freedom. And even though George had that Reddit free speech energy sometimes, Kelly clearly never thought of him as a conservative. Quote, "Of course he didn't like politically correct language, but at the same time, he taught me from day one that the N-word is the worst word and you can never say it," she says. "He taught me you should never punch down and that black and brown people are getting fucked all day long by this government, and women too. My dad was a progressive. He was always for the underdog. If you're like me and you've read and listened to every piece of Carlin media out there, calling him a progressive does seem to conflict with a lot of what he said about ideology. In the preface to his 1998 book, Brain Droppings, Carlin writes, quote, "So if you read something in this book that sounds like advocacy of a particular political point of view, please reject the notion. My interest in issues is merely to point out how badly we're doing, not to suggest a way we might do better. As with most great comics, it's hard to tell where George ends and the persona begins. Maybe that passage is just part of the persona." A lot of what Kelly says about her dad does conflict with the persona, but she knew the guy. I'm not going to argue with her. I think a lot of his political material was true to what he believed, but at the same time, he weaves in a lot of absurdity that I just can't see being consistent with who it seems he was off stage. When he says, "I kinda like it when a lot of people die," I don't think that's an earnest expression of his beliefs. I think he's pointing out a dark trait of human psychology. Morbid curiosity. There's a little spark of excitement you might feel inside yourself when you hear about some terrible event like a bombing or natural disaster. The spark might even get bigger as the death toll rises. You're not happy that people are suffering, but it gets your little ape brain going. It has a sick fascination with learning all the gory details. Carlin's humor often comes from fully embracing this type of phenomenon and going all in on the dark recesses of his mind. But when Carlin says,
They're not pro-life. You know what they are? They're anti-woman. Simple as it gets.
I think he's honestly telling us what he thinks of conservatives. And that does seem to match Kelly's memories of George. Now, a little earlier, this article mentioned that Breitbart had tried to claim George Carlin for the modern conservative movement. Let's take a closer look at what they had to say about him. The Independent article links to this Breitbart article. Quote, "Nolte, Saudi Arabia satirists are officially funnier than American satirists," with Nolte referring to the author John Nolte. Oh boy. Perhaps it comes as no surprise that the article largely consists of Mr. Nolte complaining that SNL is not mean enough to Joe Biden. Something he and I happen to agree on. Don't get used to it, Nolte. The Saudi Arabian satirists in question are two actors playing Biden and Harris in a short sketch on some Saudi TV channel. I think the best way for me to do this is to just play the clip for you, then go back to Nolte's commentary. I apologize in advance.
Thank you very much. Today, we're going to talk about the crisis in Spain. Yeah, we're going to talk about the crisis in Africa. Russia. And I want to talk about the president of Russia, Putin. Putin, listen to me. I have a very important message to you. The message is, and the president of China, I didn't finish Russia.
Yes, sir.
Thank you to correct me, First Lady.
Damn.
Thank you very much. God bless you, and God bless.
Thank you all. Hallelujah. Clap to your president. Clap to your president right now.
Where do we begin? I love the bad translations. Thank you to correct me. Clap to your president. And I swear he was saying Christ instead of crisis. But, good for these Saudi comedians. Even if they're probably reading these lines phonetically, that's still pretty impressive. I can't say how well I would do with Arabic. I liked the Biden guy a little better. He was at least trying to do an impression, but it is what it is. Nolte was blown away, though. He writes, quote, "Why is that 68-second clip so hilarious? Because it's so true. If that clip weren't based on truth, we wouldn't laugh at it. Everything in that clip is hilarious, including having a man portray Kamala Harris. Why? Because when the two of them are on stage together, Kamala's the cravenly ambitious, dim-witted alpha male to Biden's dribbling, barely conscious, oatmeal-dribbling beta male. I swear to God, dude, Freudian doesn't even begin with these people. So do they not have editors over at Breitbart? Biden's a dribbling, oatmeal-dribbling beta dribble man? And I'm pretty sure a man played Harris because there are some strict dress codes and behavioral restrictions on women in Saudi Arabia, not some psychosexual artistic choice on this low-budget interstitial. Now here's where Carlin comes into it. The article concludes, quote, "But the rest of the world is not only laughing at Biden and those who allegedly elected him. They're laughing at our cowardly, bought and sold satirists who've traded in laughs for a seat at the elite trough." Again, I agree with the second part, and the first part, honestly. I just find it hilarious when they go, those who allegedly elected him. This is why everyone's a liberal at the end of the day, right? The resistance to Biden supposedly stealing the election mostly amounted to comments like this. Little digs at Biden in your dinky little Breitbart column. You showed him, Nolte. But I agree with the rest. Biden is a joke. And the so-called satirists of SNL could hardly even be considered court jesters at this point. They're fully at the table with the Democratic Party and corporate elite. And they're not nearly as hostile to Republicans as a lot of Republicans seem to think. I just don't think that Trump is any better or that horrendous Saudi comedy is funny just because it mocks Biden. The piece ends with, quote, "Where are George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Sam Kinison, and Lenny Bruce when we need them most?" Republicans have such a strange relationship with art. Democrats probably do this too, but I've really noticed it with Republicans. They only appreciate art when the creator of the art does something to piss off the libs. This might be too much of a generalization. Maybe it's more just the right-wing media. But it just seems like as soon as, say, Dave Chappelle attacks trans people, not even with jokes, by the way, he just attacks them, Republicans start saying he's one of the comedy greats. Really? You guys think Dave Chappelle is one of the greats? You didn't think he was one of the greats when he was talking about the black experience on stage 20 years ago, telling jokes about poverty, over-policing, and racism in media.
Terrorists don't take black hostages. Terrorists are smart. They know what they're doing there, you know. They called the White House. Hello? We have got 5 black... Hello? This is an election year. I'm gonna ask you, you're a white guy, do you know who you're voting for yet? Don't know, do you? That is a cultural thing. He knows who he's gonna vote for. He's just not gonna tell me.
You didn't think he was one of the greats when he spoke out about George Floyd's murder in 2020.
And you know why 400 cops showed up? Because one of their own was murdered. So how the fuck can they understand what's going on in these streets?
But he vice signals one time, and now you're his biggest fan. And that's what I think is happening here. The guys Nolte listed would hate him, Trump, and the entire Republican Party. Maybe not Sam Kinison. I don't think anyone knows what was going through that guy's head.
Marlboro! Cigarettes! Smoky!
But Carlin, Pryor, and Bruce? Are you kidding? But that's the thing. At times throughout their careers, all three of those guys said, "Fuck you, don't tell me what to say." And conservatives just clung to it without knowing the backgrounds of the guys saying it. And it's okay to like art that doesn't necessarily match your beliefs. Just be honest about it. So Kelly Carlin described George as a progressive. But how did George describe himself? What did he say about politics off stage?
People to the left of center, liberals, Democrats, populists, they're interested in people, human beings and human values. People to the right of the line, Republicans and rich people and right-wingers, they're interested in property. Property, not people. And they're soulless. They're without soul. They don't really care. These Christians don't do Jesus' work, which is to feed the poor and take care of the ones who can't help themselves. That's what their Jesus said. Help them in my name.
Now, I'm a socialist, so I don't quite agree with the labels he uses here. I don't consider liberals or Democrats to be on the left. And populism is a squishy term that I think is used to activate people all over the political spectrum, but his point is clear, and I think this clip alone demonstrates that he identified more with ideas he saw as left of center. However, there were times where George was more explicitly leftist in his analysis, and dare I say, came across as positively Marxist. Like I said earlier, Carlin correctly identified the capitalist ruling class as the enemy of the working class. He talked about the owners of the US and the illusion of choice in our politics. It's very possible he read about this stuff, but I think he was just such a sharp, observant guy that he came to a lot of these conclusions on his own. In this clip from either 2004 or 2005, Carlin appeared as one of the panelists on Real Time with Bill Maher. He brings a class and race analysis to the discussion about the Bush administration's botched response to Hurricane Katrina and the subsequent catastrophe in New Orleans.
It shouldn't be a surprise that rich white men don't care about poor black people, period. So they're not high on their list. They're not high on their list. The owners of this country don't care about the poor in general.
And as Carlin says this, the conservative guy on the panel accuses him of using Marxist talking points. I know they do that a lot, but in this case, he's actually kind of right.
Is this Karl Marx talking to me? The owners of this country are the voters of this country.
You're wrong about that, my friend.
Now, of course, this is the Bill Maher Show, so I apologize, but Bill is about to speak. However, while he might not admit it, he has moved to the right in recent years, so if you're a lefty like me, he's not as bad here as you're used to.
Is it not wrong for the president to issue an ultimatum that there was zero tolerance? As if in the middle of this crisis, what we need to do is shoot Tyrone because he's getting out of Circuit City with some soggy tweeters.
The real looting in this country takes place in the transfer of the wealth from the poor to the rich. I'm sorry that you don't like class and the truth, my friend, but you're just stuck with it. And the poor have been systematically looted in this country. The rich have been made richer under this criminal fascist president and his government.
So Carlin had a fundamental understanding of class politics and knew that class warfare was already being waged against the working class by the capitalist class. He says owners instead of capitalists, but that's exactly what capitalists are. Sometimes we even call them the owning class. And lest you think Carlin was simply a class reductionist, don't you worry, he was also woke as fuck. Here he is talking to Larry King about comedian Andrew Dice Clay in 1990.
His targets are underdogs, and comedy traditionally has picked on people in power. Women and gays and immigrants are kind of, to my way of thinking, underdogs. And, he ought to be careful because he's Jewish. And a lot of the people who want to pick on these kind of groups, the Jews are on that list. So I think his core audience are young white males who are threatened by these groups. The women who assert themselves and are competent are a threat to these men.
Now, just in case you've made it this far and somehow still think Carlin would have liked Trump, let's get even more specific. Don't forget, Carlin and Trump were both public figures of similar age, and their careers overlapped by many decades. I have no doubt they were aware of each other from at least the 1980s onward. Here's Carlin in 1989 when an interviewer asks for his thoughts on Trump.
Donald Trump.
An interesting kind of a sideshow. A real rat. It would be nice to see him run over by a truck.
Thanks for watching. If you like what we do here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you can, help us out on Patreon. Bye now.
But there are some words that you can go to jail for. Dirty fucking crook. But if you're with the bishop's wife at lunch, it's better not to ask for the goddamn lettuce. Cock is in the Bible. Then we've added fart, turd, and twat.